So when we start to look at kind of the entire course, everything's kind of broken into modules. So when we look at this first module, it starts off with our introduction and our wellness, for the EMT. How do we take care of ourselves in a stressful profession? Then we start to lead into some of these other concepts. We start to get into the equipment that we use in our moving and lifting, and then we have our medical, legal, and ethics. And that's a big chapter that's not only important for testing, but that's something that on a daily basis, every time we have a patient interaction, we need to be aware of those things. When we pass that, we kind of slide into our medical terminology, our anatomy and physiology, our perfusion chapter, our lifespan development, and all of a sudden, we kind of get through the first couple of chapters, like, oh, this isn't so bad, and then all of a sudden we start there and like, boom. In my opinion, I think that especially if you don't have a medical background, this first module is incredibly challenging. So if you don't already have a working knowledge of medical terminology and a good foundation of A&P, it's like learning an entire new language. So what we do throughout the course is you're going to hear these words, and I say them over and over, so just by pure repetition, by the end of the program, these all come kind of full circle, and it starts to become part of your daily language, and you forget that you ever didn't know what these words meant. So when we start to look at this, there's some definitions that we have to understand. The big change since the NREMT kind of took over and standardized kind of our education and our curriculum for learning was they really put more emphasis on the why, the physiology, the A&P. So we have to understand where things are in the body, how the body works. We have to understand how a healthy body works. So as we start to progress, we get into like our third module, we start to look at like in our medical emergencies, we start to look at pathophysiology, disease processes. We start to understand, well, a normal healthy body would work this way. When it starts to have these disease pathologies, the body's going to start to compensate and try to make it adaptations to maintain that homeostasis, right? That equilibrium, that balance that we have to stay in. So what I want to do is I want to give us, kind of the basis of these definitions that we need to know, so that way we can start, reviewing these kind of over and over. So when we start to look, and we look at the beginning, we start with kind of that ventilation. All right. When we look at ventilation, ventilation is movement of air. Movement of air in and out. So when we're breathing normally, we're able to bring air from our ambient environment, right, our room air, into, and when we talk in our respiration and our respiratory chapter, right, we look at how that happens, that negative pressure system moving air in. When we assist with ventilation, when we use our BVM, positive pressure ventilation, we can assist the patient by moving air in and out. Our second definition is our respiration. Alright? A lot of people use these words interchangeably, and they are not the same. Ventilation is movement of air. Respiration is our exchange of gases. Okay? When we look at our respiration, our exchange of gases, this is where now we have that diffusion of oxygen and carbon dioxide. All right? So when we look at respiration, we have two types. So we'll start here, right? So we look at our respiration, our exchange of gases. We have external, also known as pulmonary. So we'll kind of refer to it as pulmonary, but you can see in your literature and your book, they use this interchangeably. Medical terminology, a lot of times we have multiple words that mean the same thing. External, we're looking at air that's coming into the body, and our site of gas exchange, our pulmonary respiration, that's our alveoli. All right? That grape-like sac, that's that site of gas exchange in the lungs. This is where we're having that exchange. Fresh oxygen is coming into the body, carbon dioxide is being exhaled, and it happens at these alveoli, between the alveoli, that thin membrane, and the capillaries in the lungs. Right? Internal, they're looking at now we're inside the body, and this happens cellular. So this happens at every single cell. Every cell in the body has a constant supply of oxygen, glucose, water. Without those, the cells can't function. When we start to look at the function of the cells, that brings us to our next definition, and that's metabolism. Right, so metabolism is something we hear a lot, right? Oh, I get old, my metabolism slows down, my hands don't fit. When we look at this metabolism, we're looking at the work of cell, right? Every single cell anatomically is designed and shaped a very specific way, and it's built that way to do a very specific job. So the heart cells do a great job beating, but if I take the heart cells and I put them in bone, they don't do the same job, right? They're not built for that. So all of the cells are designed and built, anatomy, to do a specific function, and that's our physiology. When we look at metabolism, this is work of the cell. All right? Remember when we look at our children, right? Kids, they have a much higher metabolic rate. They have a much higher metabolism because we do most of our growing within the first 3 years of our life. You look at a newborn, and then you look at them on their first birthday, right? And you look at the changes, from when they're delivered, take their first breath in the world, and then that first birthday, right, when they're ruining cake for everybody. I'm a fat kid, I get very sensitive when people ruin cake, right? You look at that growth and development over that first year, they're growing leaps and bounds. This is why when we look at a newborn, their respiratory rate is about 100, the respiratory rate is somewhere between 30 and 60. You'll see 40 and 60, 30 and 50, somewhere in that range, they have a much higher respiratory rate. Adults, we're looking at, usually 12 to 20 on average at rest. Again, these are averages. But we can see, newborn, a lot more oxygen demand. Heart rate. We look at our newborn, they have a normal heart rate, at birth of 140 to 160. Right? If their heart rate drops under 100, we have to start looking at being able to ventilate them, trying to get that oxygen level up, reverse that hypoxia. And if they get to 60 or below, now we're doing CPR on them because it's not adequate to meet their metabolic needs. An adult, our normal resting heart rate is 60 to 100. So now we start to see that, as we get older, things start to slow down a little bit. Right? The cells are rapidly dividing and developing, system development, brain development, they're starting to learn speech. All of these things are starting to happen very early on in childhood, so their metabolic rate is much, much higher. Okay? So we start kind of looking here, we get to our metabolism. Now we start looking at a couple other definitions. So we come and we look at ischemia. Ischemia is lack of blood flow. Okay? Lack of blood flow. This can be for any number of reasons. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about this. All right? So this is where now something is preventing blood from continuously circulating. When blood isn't able to circulate and it becomes stagnant, it starts to clot. Right? This is good if we get a cut and we want to stop bleeding. We put some direct pressure. Now that blood isn't circulating, some of the vasculature, we can get it to clot, scab over, and now we can stop that bleeding. When we start to talk about like heart attacks and strokes, we start to look at pulmonary embolisms, and we talk about ischemia to some of our vital organs. We're going to see that as we get a little bit further in the program, that this is going to be now where we have to look at interventions to be able to keep this person alive. So ischemia is lack of blood flow. When we look at hypoxia, lack of oxygen. All right? We have multiple lectures where we're going to talk about, hypoxia, things that contribute to hypoxia, that cause hypoxia. Hypoxia is going to be the number one thing that causes altered mental status in our patients. So now as we start to look, we come upon someone, we're doing that, alert check. Are they alert and oriented? Person, place, time, and event. If they're altered, we want to start thinking about, is there something going on in the body that's interrupting this oxygen supply, that causing them to become hypoxic? Okay? Perfusion, okay? This is a definition that we are going to work with through the entire program. And we're going to see when we get to the end of the program, when we kind of pull this all together, we're going to see that ultimately everything we do is to try to maintain this for our patients, right? This is when we start to talk about shock. Our medical word for shock is hypoperfusion, hypo being low. The medical name is literally low perfusion. So we look at what perfusion is. This is where now it's kind of a combination of some of these things. So perfusion the delivery of oxygen and nutrients. All right? So the nutrients that we're going to focus on, we're going to be looking at glucose, our sugar and fuel supply, and water. Right? And we said every cell needs a constant supply of oxygen, of glucose, and water in order to maintain their metabolism to do the work that they're intended to do. Now this has a second part to it. So we have and removal of waste products. All right? So when we look at our perfusion, it's twofold. We need to make sure that all the cells get their oxygen, their glucose, and their water. We also need the byproducts of metabolism to be removed. So when we look at our metabolism, we have two types. We have aerobic and anaerobic. Aerobic, this is going to be with oxygen. Anaerobic is without or limited. Okay? So when we look at this here, when cells have a good oxygen supply, our waste product is going to be CO2, carbon dioxide, a little bit of heat, a little bit of water. Without the presence of oxygen, when we start to switch, this is where now we have lactic acid, a little bit of heat, a little bit of water.